Well, thank you for tuning in today. My name is Jeremy Nation. I'm the marketing director here at Hemi Labs, and I'm joined by co-founder of Spectra, Ulysse, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what Spectra has been building in the ecosystem, specifically on Hemi, and frankly, what drew him into crypto in the first place, and what it looks like for a user to find success on their platform. Ulysse, thank you for joining me today. To kick things off,
for the invite.
Yeah, of course. To kick things off, why don't you tell me a little bit about what drew you towards crypto in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I can quickly introduce myself. My name is Ulysse. I'm a co-founder of Spectra Finance, which is what we're going to talk about today. I've been building in DeFi for, I think, around 6 years now. And my role as a co-founder is, of course, I wear many different hats, but I focus mostly on product, UI, UX, app experience. So everything that you interact with on the web app, if you ever try the web app on Spectra, or if you're going to try it later. This is mostly what I focus on, and basically the broader vision around yield markets, which is what we're going to describe. And to answer your question, how I got into crypto, the story is I studied computer science at EPFL in Switzerland, which is where I live. And at first, I was more into video game development. This is kind of what got me into UI, UX, like programming visuals and programmative interfaces. And I was not into finance at all. I didn't have any notion of finance, and I caught up with it when I got into DeFi. But this is where I got my background in visuals. And at the time, my co-founder, Gaspard, which is my co-founder and who I also studied with at EPFL, was running the Blockchain Student Association. So he was deeply into it, and I didn't know anything about it. So he kind of showed me around, and I was very interested into it, but it just seemed all very complicated. It's only during the summer of 2020, which is coincidentally also the DeFi summer of 2020, when basically the DeFi as we know it started. I was graduating at the time, and he introduced me to Ethereum. And it was this whole craze about the huge APYs and the yield farming, and it was the golden era of DeFi. Basically, it was a very nascent ecosystem, but also very immature, but also very exciting. And that's what pulled me in. It just felt very early and very exciting. It felt like a space where you could build completely new primitives and new financial instruments from scratch, and basically everything was there to build.
And to put this in perspective, like as DeFi began to flourish in that ecosystem in that era, this was a time when previously only financial institutions had been kind of able to access these type of instruments, and making them widely available and accessible to the public was really kind of a selling point for crypto and a proving point for it as well. Absolutely. Now, in DeFi, there are ways to earn, and there are instruments that have been built, as we spoke, that were once only kind of like relegated to the banks. What is it that Spectra is building here in this DeFi ecosystem?
Yeah. So how we came up with Spectra, as I told you, I didn't have a financial background at all. But I will maybe go a bit more into what problem it solves and how we came up with it. But to put it very simply, in simple terms, Spectra is yield infrastructure. We are building the yield markets for interest-bearing assets for yield in DeFi. So we build markets specifically around tokenized yield, and I'm going to go a bit later into what this means. But the idea and the pain point was during that DeFi summer of 2020, when there were 3-digit, 4-digit APY. Sometimes it was just insane, very, very unsustainable. There was actually no way and no tools to hedge your risk on that APY or structure your exposure better. If you wanted on the other side to increase your risk and increase your exposure, so get leverage on yield. And this is what led us to start the project with this realization and this fact. And actually, fun fact for those of you who knew Spectra before it was Spectra, when we started, we were called AP Wine, and this is just a play on word on APY, annual percentage yield. And the fact that we're a French team. So we actually started the project around a glass of wine, and we were just having this conversation about, okay, what instrument can we bring to DeFi? And that was the most relevant. And we have still this vision, that we have to bring the yield markets and make them very efficient for the space. But so this is kind of how it started, crazy APYs, no tools to de-risk or increase your risk. And how it works, basically, this primitive that we brought to DeFi is PT and YT. So PT is principal token, and YT, so if some of you here in the audience already used it, is yield token. So essentially at Spectra, this is our core primitive, and then it enables a whole new range of products that were not possible before. But principal token essentially is the interest-bearing token that you put in DeFi, for example, AUSDC. This is the principal amount that generates the yield. And then on the other hand, you have the yield token. So everything that is generated by this asset goes into the yield token. So you're essentially splitting the principal from the future yield. And then this enables fixed rate yield leverage, as we're going to discuss about it a bit later on.
Now let's step back a second. What is the user journey before you get to Spectra? Like, how are you getting these assets? Where are they coming from? How are you getting them into Spectra? What does it look like?
Absolutely. So we basically enable the market for yield trading, which means that you have possibilities such as fixed rate by buying PTs or yield leverage by buying YTs. These are two essential products that are enabled with this primitive of tokenization, plus a market that is tailored for this use case. So the user journey on Spectra, for example, for the Hemi pool that we had a couple months ago, and that was very successful, and we're going to talk about it a bit later, was that you could get a fixed rate on your Bitcoin, or on the other hand, get leverage exposure on your Bitcoin. So on Hemi points, but also native yield from BitFi, which is the provider that enabled yield generation on Bitcoin. So you can get one of these two, and that depends on your risk profile.
So if you take a fixed rate, what are you betting on then?
Yeah, well, PTs, it's very simple. In traditional finance, this exists. It's a zero coupon bond. So it's like T-bills. It's like any coupon, with that generates interest. You want to get a fixed rate on it, you just buy a coupon. And this is exactly what we're doing with this fixed rate product. So you just come on Spectra and you get basically an asset. If you want to visualize it even more simple, a PT is kind of a guarantee that you're going to get a specific asset, a specific amount at a specific time. So it's essentially locked, until that time. And by buying this asset, you get a guarantee that you're going to get that amount. So since you're buying it at a discount, you're getting return on that asset that you bought.
Now, if you're feeling a little riskier and you want to be like maybe taking a leverage bet, you can go on the other end then.
Absolutely. So if you want to get completely rid of your principal and you just want the full yield exposure, you can get leverage exposure. So this means that, for example, with $1, you can invest and buy YT. You can get $100, $100,000 of yield exposure with just a very small amount of input assets.
So I take my dollar, I stick it in the protocol, and then I'm able to get $1,000 worth of leverage in the protocol based on wherever that yield goes from when I plug it in.
Absolutely, you're basically forfeiting, that amount that you just put in. You're basically buying the future yield of that asset you're betting on. So you're essentially betting that it's going to generate more, these $1,000 of principal. You're essentially betting that it's going to generate more than what you put in essentially at the beginning.
So if yield rates go up, I'm in a good spot.
Absolutely.
And this is predictable. Oh, go on. Sorry.
It's been a huge use case. There's been a huge narrative with points, and this has driven volume and usage a lot in the past few months, in the past few years. When you have airdrops and points, there has been the Hemi points as well on Spectra, and this has been a very successful pool. So people were able to get leverage exposure to points, and we've actually published a few case studies of very successful users who turned an initial investment into leverage exposure to yield, and they were right to bet on it because it turned out to be a great opportunity. And this is not something you can do with traditional markets, and this is what Spectra enables: either less risk or increase your risk if you're really degen and you know what you're doing.
Now, how does Spectra get its price feeds and everything like that?
So it's all on chain. So when you have an interest-bearing token, there is actually a standard. Maybe we can go more a bit into the technical details, but there is a standard for yield-bearing assets, and you have an exchange rate. So it's kind of a vault that generates yield like that with a share price that increases. And Spectra's contracts do not rely on any oracle or any off-chain feed. It's all on-chain yield and on-chain trading.
Now, that's important because if you introduce an oracle, that's basically a central point of failure. And we've seen a lot of these types of protocols, be pregnable to an oracle that's been taken over, giving a false feed to the prices, and then they take advantage of that in a single transaction, the same block, where they do some kind of flash loan or something like that, and take all the liquidity out of something. That's not going to happen if you're using an on-chain price feed. So that's excellent. How can we describe, maybe let's look at the users that are on Spectra. What is the kind of user that benefits most from how the protocol is currently situated?
Absolutely. So we have many categories of users. The two that I described earlier is, of course, the institutions or retail or risk curators that want to decrease their exposure to yield volatility. So they're essentially getting a fixed rate, and this is very important for companies, DAOs, any other such funds. On the other hand, you have the yield traders. So these are more the speculators of yield points and any type of rewards that the yield includes. And these are more of the degen profile usually. So you can really compose with these two to enable the strategy that you want. These are the markets the use cases that's enabled with this market. And then, of course, you need a liquidity provider to provide liquidity on these markets. These are the LPs, commonly called, that are also looking for better capital efficiency. So they also get a yield, coming from the fees generated from trading volume. And they also get incentives on top. So, we have these three categories of users. It's worth mentioning that this is the first layer that we've built, and this is basically what we came up with when the market and the space didn't exist at all 6 years ago. So we were the first to develop yield tokenization. But now we also own the whole stack, the vertical stack of this primitive, PT and YT, which is the base that enables all these market trading. But now we also released a product called MetaVault, which is an abstracted vault on top of that. And this enables also a new category of users, which are just users who want to get click and forget yield without having to worry about all the rollover expiries, because these markets are very complicated to understand and they're very hard to provide liquidity for. So we introduced MetaVaults to enable this curator layer. You have basically curators that manage these positions for you. So you don't have to worry about expiries. You don't have to worry about compounding yield. It's all managed for you through these MetaVaults.
Interesting. And then that MetaVault layer just lies on the on-chain stack.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the whole positions that a MetaVault holds is transparent. You can see everything right on the dashboard. So it's all on-chain.
And
it basically allocates to pools, with different risk profiles, and depending on the strategy of the MetaVault and the curator of the MetaVault, you can choose, what kind of exposure do you want, and then they manage, all the tedious work for you. So that abstracts stuff and that makes stuff a lot easier.
Were you surprised by the demand for this type of instrument?
Well, I think, yield tokenization when we started was so small, and there has been so many competitors, that we've evolved a lot in 6 years. We've seen, honestly, everything. We've seen every single project that came up and tried a different approach. And most of these today are either dead or inactive or just not in the space anymore.
So what sets Spectra apart from them? How are you differentiating?
And that's kind of the part where I was getting to. The but is that I have to mention Pendle, which did a great job at growing this ecosystem, and that showed that with the points narrative, it's taken a huge scale. It had billions of TVL, and it really enabled this narrative of points trading, and it really showed that there is demand for this product. And at our peak, we had almost 300 million TVL. So this really confirmed, our thesis for there is a market for it, there is demand for it. Now we just need to own the whole stack and make sure that we focus on the right points, and we have a laser focused vision on what we do. Because this is a huge market in traditional finance. This is one of the biggest market, like trillions of dollars of fixed rates and coupon bonds. So it is something that is needed in DeFi. It is something that I would say was maybe even not risky enough when we started in 2020. It kind of is taking more and more sense as DeFi matures, that there is a need for this kind of instrument to kind of de-risk or increase your risk, or kind of just manage your risk exposure, because DeFi now is all about generating yield, right? So you need these instruments, these derivatives, to cover that part for you.
How do you think these instruments fall in the new kind of schema of regulatory landscape that we've seen kind of evolving in the United States and overseas?
Well, it is necessary, as I said. Institutions, they're waiting for this to be available on a bigger scale in order to move their funds into DeFi. DeFi is still growing, and it's becoming more and more mature. But we're still early, even if now governments are taking a bigger and a more precise look at DeFi. But it is still very early, and we still have to build these tools and make sure that they are available on a large scale. So that everyone can benefit from it and everyone can use it. But right now, we have to build more liquidity and build more offering in order for this to become more attractive. But essentially
in terms of like traditional adoption, we've seen over the years it's taken for these institutions to custody Bitcoin, to create frameworks for doing so, exchange traded funds, digital asset treasuries, these types of things.
Absolutely.
How rapidly do you think they're going to be ready to adopt something like what Spectra's built?
Well, if I had an answer for this, I would be betting on it. But our bet is to enable these markets when institutions are ready, and to make these ready so that they can come and use Spectra right away. So we're kind of working towards doing that. But yeah, if you can come up with an exact date, but the actual thing that I know is that we're going in the right direction, and DeFi as a whole is going in the right direction because institutions are taking a better look at us, and they are actually deploying capital, through not only through yield tokenization, but on a broader scale. You can mention, for example, real world assets. It's a huge thing. It's a huge narrative that's coming up, and I just think in general, DeFi is enabling this composable finance that was not possible before. You didn't have these kinds of interfaces that you can interact bank accounts with other banks, and it's not as easy to compose and to develop for. But DeFi really enables this and basically allows anyone to create these derivatives, these tools, even if it's more and more regulated, of course. But I think the dream of DeFi, of being able to deploy smart contracts and build these primitives is still there, and it's just going to be with now more capital and more security and more. You have to be more safe and more precise about how you do things. You can't just test and prod anymore, just like you would do in 2020, right? Because a lot of people, I think DeFi still has that image, that bad image that it needs to kind of clean. Which is that we need to give not just the impression, but the actual workflow and processes that show that we are a serious industry. And I think we're really on the process to doing that. So I'm happy about how the ecosystem is going as a whole. You can of course point things out here and there, but I think it's going in a good direction.
I think you're right. I think a lot of that comes down to having like verifiable, transparent standards for a lot of these on-chain mechanisms. As opposed to, single fail safes. So a lot of like DeFi's greatest failures have come from protocols losing hundreds of millions or even close to billions of dollars, on an industry scale, if you were looking at like the sum of all events for years. And they've come from like very simple and simple, potentially easy to catch issues. If you look at Bitcoin, I think it was Jeff Garzik recently in a stream who said that I was joined on. He said that Bitcoin has something like a $1 trillion bounty on it, basically. And so, as you said, when these DeFi protocols get like with more liquidity in them, the bounty goes up on them, and that means that they have to have very robust infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah, we still have too many hacks and too many exploits going on, and of course, we have to fix that. But again, it is still a nascent ecosystem, and we still have to grow as a broader, as a whole. So I'm pretty positive. I think it's very easy to see the market going down and all the news about the war and everything, and be pessimistic about the state of the ecosystem and its future. But there hasn't been another place in time where you can compose with finance in this way and make your own tools available to anyone who can in finance develop an app that connects to your bank and do that. Maybe it's easier today, but still in finance, it's in decentralized finance, it's made extremely easy. You also have, I think I would like to mention quickly this new payment system for agents that's coming up. So it's a standard that allows payments to be made by agents, and that allows you to build your own basically software as a service, but without having any kind of license or any kind of interaction with KYC or credit cards. It's all on chain, and I think it's beautiful. So it's easy to say that the DeFi has lost its values, but I do believe that we're still going in a good direction according to that.
Well, in terms of the values of DeFi, I think that it's still and it's fundamentally an accessible system that is not controlled by any single entity, and that is the basis of what DeFi brings to people. It's this accessible financial system that you can participate in, that you can do the types of things that financial institutions have typically been strictly doing in the ecosystem of traditional finance, and you can see value because of that. And ideally, the people who are building these systems, they see a lot of hype when markets are going up. But ideally, they maintain their focus on building the solid infrastructure so that markets can go up, and that when that hype exists and everyone's happy, it's great. We love it. We love when prices are up.
Absolutely.
But I think when things go sideways or even start to consolidate, it starts to show you who's focused solely on the hype in that marketplace and is building towards a position of being in a hype, or who is actually building value and things that can be deployed and further the conversation and the capabilities of the players who are relevant in this ecosystem. Which kind of brings me to, you guys chose to integrate with Hemi. What was the motivation there?
Just to finish on that, I think it's completely right what you said. Like we've seen a lot of bear markets, we've seen multiple cycles, and we're still there 6 years later with the same focus and the same vision. So yeah, this is where we're going, and we know it for sure. Related to Hemi, I think it was a very successful integration. We've had a lot of good relationship with you guys, and we've had a lot of fun working on this integration. I think it was very successful. It was an environment that we saw a lot of potential in for yield infrastructure. It didn't exist yet, so we came and proposed that primitive and enabled these markets. It did give us a unique positioning on Hemi because it was one of the first truly efficient yield markets on Bitcoin. I think at the peak there was about 28 million TVL on the pool, and the liquidity was deep. So people could take multi-million dollars fixed rates, which was a first for Bitcoin. The pool was based on BitFi, which is a project that generates yield on Bitcoin, so through their interest-bearing token called BFBTC. And it did become one of our most successful integration. We've also published case studies where, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but traders and speculators did play on that leverage exposure and did the right bet because it turned out to be very profitable. And on the other hand, we've had users do huge fixed rates at the time on Bitcoin, which was unseen before. Yeah. And I think it was a very successful pool, and it kind of joins our vision that Spectra should be available as a stack, as a yield market, wherever there are good yield opportunities, which is the case on Hemi.
I think what's exciting too is that Spectra extends that capacity that we've described earlier in our conversation directly to Bitcoin by virtue of Hemi's integration between Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Absolutely.
And it does so in a way that allows, because it's integrated with Hemi, we're not changing Bitcoin from being Bitcoin. Bitcoin is essentially still Bitcoin, and it has on top of it now all these capacities as a yield-bearing asset. Is Spectra positioned to, you briefly touched on the X402 payments, I think, and is Spectra positioned to interface with a new iteration of agentic trading bots and things like that we're seeing kind of proliferate across the ecosystem on a more rapid basis?
Mhm. I think that's a very interesting question. I can't reveal too much at the moment. We have announcement planned, but we do have, for example, an MCP server that we've developed, so that enables us, to start doing new strategies with AI. Yeah, I think it is a new narrative that's coming up, and that's going to be not just a narrative, but a new ecosystem as a whole. Deep AI, some call it, where you have agents, kind of managing positions for you and finding the best opportunities and the best path. So I think it's something to be in, definitely, and we're gonna have some announcements related to that.
Without going into too many of the things that you've got there, trade secrets here, what do you think the changes are to like trading behavior and strategies with, us transitioning from mainly human people who are watching charts and making their best guesses on the ecologies of these things versus these agents? Is it going to alter game theory on networks?
I think you're still gonna have that curation aspect, and this is also why we made a bet on MetaVolt. I think these go hand in hand together. In the end, it's a tool, right? It's like when you run a Claude Code for those who know, with the dangerous flag enabled. So it basically does everything on its own, and then you have case studies and scenarios where people just get completely wrecked because the agents got hacked, and they were. So I think it should be used as a tool, and it's a very, very powerful tool, and this is also why we're taking a position on AI. But yeah, I think it's an interesting topic to think about.
What would you say to someone that's kind of on the fence about these types of protocols and wants to maybe get involved with Spectra, do something with it?
Absolutely. Well, you can join our Discord. You can follow our Twitter. You can also get in touch with me. I would be super happy to. I look at the Discord every day, every morning, every night. I check the questions. I try to answer as much as possible. So I would love, honestly, if you would get in touch with me, and we can chat. If you have opportunities, I think we didn't really touch on this, but Spectra is permissionless, which is something that sets us from our competitors. So basically, anyone can come and create a market on Spectra. So you can come with any bearing token, and it can be literally protocols, that want to enable this new range of use cases for their users. So fixed rate, yield leverage, and so on. And they just come to Spectra, or they can also ask us, but they can do it themselves, create a market. So it is really a public good / primitive that we brought to the DeFi ecosystem. Yeah, and I think if you want to get involved, if you have any opportunities in mind, feel free to reach out. I'm always available, even the weekend, any night, any time of the day.
That's wonderful. Always have to, take my hat off to someone that makes themselves available to the community like that. Let's take a look at some community questions. We do have a few here in the Hemi Discord. Thank you guys for in the Hemi Discord for putting your questions in there. We do appreciate you guys. And the first question comes from Hadouken. I hope I said that right. I think it comes from the Street Fighter terminology. I might be wrong there. But even if it seems tasteful, the USDC market on Spectra around 60% APY, we can see this market doesn't have liquidity nor the volume within the last 30 days. Is there a plan for this market or incentives coming, or was it just a test market?
So this was, I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I think in general, you should always be careful with interacting with low liquidity markets. So what I would recommend is kind of untick all the boxes, untick all the filters, take a look at how Spectra works. Maybe, try with a couple of dollars and don't get into, strategy that you're not sure about. So always kind of try the project without, before really going all into it. But to answer your question, there is a plan for rolling over our biggest and most successful pool, which was BFBTC, and we're going to have announcements in the coming month for that. But so always be careful, because it is permissionless. Always be careful what you're interacting with.
Totally builds on what you just said, which is Spectra is a permissionless protocol. So there's a very high chance that pool was set up by somebody that created that incentive structure and then did not offer liquidity to follow through with that incentive structure. and therefore, you need to perhaps Ulysse. Do you have any best practices that users could you could go over with me for users to navigate the platform?
Absolutely. So, just like on Uniswap, you can buy any token and explore any liquidity pool that was created by anyone. I recommend, that you check the filters, the safe filters. So hide small pools, hide expiring pools, because it's except if you know exactly what you're doing, it's a bit more difficult to interact with. But you can sort by liquidity. So if you look at the biggest pools, you're pretty much guaranteed to have more room for interaction.
All right. What is the exact holding amount in Hemi BTC, asks Alex from our community.
So at the moment, or?
Well, I mean, yes, at the moment.
Sure. I mean, we can check on DeFi. I think it's around $16 billion at the moment. But yeah, if you guys are interested into analytics on Spectra, there is a DeFi Llama page, and I can also link you to some dashboards that we've built to monitor the platform.
Great. And so this kind of falls into the DeFi Llama. So there's a discrepancy between DeFi Llama and CoinMarketCap. And I can speak to this. DeFi Llama has some interesting criteria for managing liquidity. And there are times where you need to tick certain boxes in the top right corner to ensure that all the liquidity is properly displayed. Sometimes liquidity that's staked liquidity or other forms of liquidity don't show up. However, I'm sure Ulysse, the CoinMarketCap figure is accurate, right?
So I'm not sure which one you're referring about, but honestly, guys, if you're
for Hemi BTC,
okay,
on the protocol.
Yeah, I would have to check, but I think maybe we can. If you guys want to join our Discord, I don't know if we can link a Discord link or something like that. You can reach out to us and we can check this together and really take the time. So I just don't want to say anything that's off, any off number, but I can definitely check with you guys. So yeah.
And these resources do exist. So there you have it. Check in the Discord to get more fine granular information about these liquidity pools. Does Spectra have any upcoming campaign on Hemi or anything in general? Asks Alpha from our community.
So our biggest planning move is going to be rolling over the BFBTC, which was a big success, and we definitely want to renew it. But we will have more announcements, when that comes in the coming month.
All right.
And by following the Twitter, you will make sure that you get all the latest announcements on Spectra.
Another question from Alex. Can you explain the YT token mechanism and how the yield is generated?
Absolutely. So if you take the example of, so if you guys, if anyone in the audience has already deposited, for example, USDC and Aave, you have your balance increasing. So it's essentially your yield being generated. And so what Spectra does is what I explained a bit earlier, is it strips, it's literally called yield stripping. It strips the yield from the principal. So on the one hand, you get two tokens when you come on Spectra, and you do that. It's a bit of an advanced mechanism, but when you LP and when you do such actions, the core primitive is that your AUSDC, your yield-bearing asset, gets transformed into a principal token, which is the amount that you put initially, plus the future yield. So at the end of the period, because Spectra works on fixed periods of time, for example, 6 months. So in 6 months, your yield token is going to be worth 0, but you're going to have accumulated all the yield generated by your initial, 100 USDC, for example. So you really get that separation, which allows you to do either fixed rate or yield leverage. And by buying YT on the market, you essentially forfeit your initial swap amount, your initial deposit, in exchange for all of the future yield that's going to be generated on this asset. And all the yield generation is just forwarded, is just equivalent to the generation of yield of your interest-bearing token initially. So, if you're going on a BFBTC pool, for example, then the yield is going to come from BFBTC, so BitFi generating yield on top of Bitcoin. That's how.
What's the advantage to doing this as opposed to just natively staking in a protocol?
Well, by natively staking on the protocol, you never know how much you're getting. So for example, APYs can fluctuate, especially on stable coins, between 1% to 15%. So you never really know what you're getting. And when there are points in play, it's even worse because these points are not valued. So by getting a fixed rate, you know exactly what you're getting at the end. Or with a yield leverage, you can bet on whether the yield is going to go up, down, and trade that yield accordingly. So two very different strategies for two very different kinds of users, but two very powerful tools.
Indeed. Well, is there anything else that you would like to go over in the time that we have here?
Yeah, sure. We will be at ETHCC. We're going to have some presence there, a big part of the team. So, you know, if you want to meet up, I would be super happy to do so between two events, two networking sessions. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
All right, guys.
And,
well,
yeah.
There you have it. Ulysse, thank you for joining us today on our first episode of Built on Hemi. You've given us a wonderful overview of the protocol, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. If anyone else has any other questions for Ulysse, please go ahead and join the Hemi Discord, where you can ask us what's going on with Spectra, and join the Spectra Discord, where you can ask him directly, of course. And don't forget to follow Spectra Finance on Twitter, as well as Hemi here. We really thank you for coming in, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Jamie. Have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.